we are celebrating Mass a little bit later. I had a busy day, but we're celebrating St. Martin of Tours. And St. Martin is one of my favorite saints. As a veteran, I was in the military, and he's a man of my own heart. When I was discerning priesthood late in high school, I kind of ran away and went in the military. But then the vocation and call to priesthood only grew and grew, and I relate with Martin of Tours because he had a similar experience. Martin of Tours was born around 316, right when Christianity became accepted and actually made legal. It was outlawed cult, but the emperor at the time made it so, and so he was compelled to be a soldier of Christ. He became, a monk, and then later a bishop, and he's one of the most beloved saints in medieval Europe. He was born in the modern-day Hungary to pagan parents. He converted in a young age, and he had to go into the military, and I think it was around he was 15 years old, because his father was a military officer, Roman. And so Martin was required to follow in his footsteps. Despite being Christian, he was also public about it. From a young age, he enrolled into, I think he was in the cavalry, Roman cavalry, and he was stationed in France. But his life really turned around when the famous story of St. Martin tearing off half his cloak, that was around, 338, they say. So about, he was early 20s. And he was stationed in Amiens during a harsh winter. And he encountered nearly like a naked beggar on the outskirts of the town, which was sadly common back then. And at the gates, Martin took his military cloak, cut it in half with his sword, and gave one portion to the beggar while keeping the other half for himself. The cloak technically was not his. So Roman soldiers, what you have, like your sword, your shield, your armor, technically doesn't belong to you. It belonged to the Imperial Roman army. So when he cut it in half, that was a huge, moment publicly. That night, Martin had a dream and a vision of Christ wearing the cloak, half the cloak that he had given away. And so he left the military shortly after his baptism, and he basically, which was a kind of a controversial thing, he also finished his military service. So he spent the next several years finishing up, and but he left because of his Christian faith, and it was contrary to warfare. This I also relate with. When I was in special ops training, I was a combat controller selectee, and then a third of the way in, I felt God calling me to the priesthood pretty strongly, and I was like, really? I was so excited and pumped to be in that environment. I wanted to be, an operator, and then God showed me a vision. He showed me two paths. He showed me a life of being in the military and being a combatant, special operator, and then he showed me the life of a priest, and he showed me the spiritual warfare I would endure, becoming an exorcist as a priest. So I could either do one or the other, but I couldn't do both. And it's something to do with fighting and taking life. It's something to do with being a fighter, something. And why I share this little story is because Martin told the Emperor Julian at the time, when he declared, before a huge battle, he declared his allegiance to Christ and said, I am a soldier of Christ, and it is not lawful for me to fight. And that's what I felt when I was at Keesler Air Force Base in the middle of my training. It was such a, 2 years of training, 2 years of being a triathlete, swimming underwater for minutes and minutes, just insane training. And then all of a sudden the Lord I experienced him profoundly in this vision. I don't know what it was. It wasn't a dream and it wasn't a vision. It was something in between. And the Lord told me, you can do one or the other, but you can't do both. So I chose priesthood. I think that's why I left. I rung the bell. I voluntarily withdrew. It was hard. It was really hard for me. And then my buddy, Rob O'Connor, he went and became one of the most decorated combat controllers in the last 20 years of war in the Middle East, Afghanistan and Iraq. So that's why Martin in his story and why he left and what he told the emperor, he said, I am a soldier of Christ, it is not lawful for me to fight. That's exactly why I left combat controller. My God, my LT was really mad because they really needed, and they were short. But it was I could only do both, and I realized that if I wanted to really be a priest someday and engage in spiritual warfare, I had to leave modern warfare behind. So then he entered the monastic life. He sought Bishop Hilary, famous bishop at the time, and that was his mentor. Martin founded one of the first monasteries in Gaul, which was France, and established a community, one of the first monasteries around 360. So Christianity is new. It's fresh, new, and legal now. So monasteries started popping up. Soon, in a couple hundred years, Saint Benedict is going to come around in the 5th-6th century and continue that monastic movement and what they called the Way. He's one of the founding fathers of monasticism in modern Western monasticism. Martin is. He then became bishop, and people of Tours wanted him as bishop, and so knowing that he would refuse, they lured him into the monastery under pretense that someone needed his pastoral care, and they basically kidnapped him. And there's other priests who became, great, like Albert the Great I just did the other day. These are the holy men that the people want. And so he essentially was dragged into a church like Albert and became bishop. That's how he became as bishop. But Martin, like Albert, was kind of unconventional. Rather than living in a palace, rather than living that life as a bishop, which they were treated like kings. They are princes of the church, and they were treated as such. But Martin wasn't into that. Same with Albert. His episcopal duties, he traveled tirelessly throughout his diocese, helping reform and build it. Again, this is early 400s. This is before Rome fell. So this is at the early days of the church in Europe. He preached tirelessly against, paganism and other heresies, Arianism. He founded churches and monasteries throughout Europe. And he's credited with bringing Christianity deep within Europe, especially France. France later became, they call it the daughter of the church. That's where the church really flourished first, and St. Martin had a lot to do with it. He's credited for bringing the church there. His cape, later his capella was called, later became the word for chapel. And so Martin's cloak, the cappa, it's still preserved in Tours to this day. He's credited with having chapels in general, piety. This was before churches really were established. Chapels really came first, and the monasticism started to develop and so forth, but it all kind of stemmed from Martin's tearing his cloak in half. Martin died in 397 while visiting a parish in his diocese. And his funeral drew enormous crowds, tens of thousands, I read, thousands, whatever that is back then. And his tomb became I've been there, one of medieval Europe's most important pilgrimage sites. He became one of the most widely known bishops in the Middle Ages. So Martin's cult spread wide across Europe. He became the patron saint of soldiers, tailors, and France. So France has a wonderful saint in Martin, and November 11th today is when they celebrate it. Ironically, Veterans Day is today too. So veterans turn to Martin of Tours. He's my patron as a soldier. You know, my days as a combat controller apprentice, and what I experienced leading to my vocation to a priest is also tied with him. So I love Martin of Tours. His life really bridged the gap between the Roman Empire of the time and Christianity as it is. The medieval church really blossomed first with Martin. It later led to the other bishops like Augustine, and then later on Benedict, and so forth. And so, yeah, his monastic spirituality, his compassion for justice, and his, bishop, his pastoral care as bishop was really founding. It led to Saint Gregory the Great, about 150 years later, who was a profound bishop, Pope Gregory. He's the one who created the first missal. The missal that we have today, the Big Red Book, that one right there, has its initial first roots, Genesis, really, with medieval Europe and Gregory. And it all ties with Martin and what he did. He's one of the founding fathers of the church and its governing as it is during the 4th century. And so remember St. Martin on November 11th with Veterans Day, and God bless, and I'll see you at Mass.